can use these 20 minutes for Q&A, and I think all the artists are in the room right now also, so if you have specific questions about any project that you have seen today, we can just pass the microphone to the artists, or if you have any critiques about the exhibition, now we can hear, and otherwise we can use this 20 minutes for drinking more.
I know it's late, but I couldn't stop asking this question that it seems that your concept is kind of caught up in this romantic notion of the exilic, the exile figure. This is what I understood from the talks and and from the choice of your artists, that you somehow concentrated on artists who have kind of moved and established themselves individually, and they have somehow settled in different contexts, and now they are more in a modality of reflecting on transnationalism, perhaps. So this strikes me as a kind of a discourse about exile, which belongs to discussions in the 80s. And I am now trying to ask you, I want to ask, I'm thinking, is this position, the fact that you are bringing the exilic to this platform here with the exhibition as well, then how does that square with the refugee crisis that we are facing today, which seems unspeakable? That the only mention that some of you flippantly said was that there is a fashion or something, a lot of events going on about the Syrian artists, and we don't want to be put into that category. So, which I don't know what that means, but it seems that the Syrian refugee situation seems unspeakable, that it cannot be somehow addressed or somehow artistically embraced, that somehow there is a dislocation between this exilic position and this thing which is outside, which is making us very, one of you said pessimistic. We don't even know what to think about it. Maybe the words are not enough. But so what I'm trying to say is that I didn't find this connection, that you are comfortably sitting in this rather more individual exile positions. And I'm curious what the artists and curators would, this is a thinking question. There's not a ready answer. Okay, but thank you very much for all your words.
Yeah. I want to respond to this question two ways. Like, one of them is, I think one thing we should make clear, of course, we're not curators really. Like, we didn't choose artworks from art history, and we didn't choose artists from artist bodies. So we're basically organizing this event and the exhibition, and almost like a publication house, we publish these things in order to create this dialogue. So anthropologically speaking, we are referring to one new way of thinking about this. It's kind of an anthropological trope nowadays, which is about the anti-crisis. So anti-crisis, I'm also, within my work, I'm trying to refer to it as, so these things had to move anyway. Like, the mobility was in the codes of this systematic mobility that we are discussing right now. The Damascus room had to be removed from Damascus and represented in Metropolitan Museum. And the apricots from Damascus, they had to be shipped to Istanbul and Constantinople at the times, and from Constantinople they had to be shipped to Cairo and Venice. So there's like a new understanding among the anthropologues that they're trying to frame the situation as an anti-crisis situation so that we can discuss. If the situation is a crisis situation, yes, we can never discuss, so we should look somewhere else, yeah? So that's what's happening in the ancient Greek times. So all the busts are looking at different directions, right? So nobody's looking at the subject. So, but today I think we're at the point that we have to accept the situation as it is, as an anti-crisis situation that we have to deal with, and we have to talk about it. And if we're not going to talk about it in an art house, like, then we're just leaving it to media and the parliament or the government to just not to talk about it. And the second thing is, I think, I mean, probably if we were professional curators, like, we will be more confident to answer this question, but I think it's a challenge between the identity politics and the contextual representation of art. So, I mean, an easier way to make this exhibition will be just like whoever is, you know, born in Damascus between 1960 and 1990 and who lives in Istanbul right now, raise your hands, we're going to make a show about you. So we didn't really want to do that. Like, we just wanted to really visually and contextually create a dialogue between ourselves and between whoever is in our circles and who are to be our next comrades with this interconnections through language, through site stories, or through apricots.
Well, really simply, I think artists are not really good with formulas. So I think it's a good thing that you didn't find what you expected to find here in any case. So I see it as a good thing in some ways.
I could just follow up with, I mean, Asu's concern is that there's an indiscriminate use throughout the afternoon between the terms of exile, refugee, immigrant, and that's, I mean, that opened, I think, you know, part of, I mean, Asu's concern is that, and I find that troubling.
Just to completely different subject, not actually, but just to sort of take another thread, to think about what we've heard this afternoon. I mean, not to disagree with what has been said, but to think about this about language. And, you know, in a way, what I've been observing Dilek's work over the years is to take, of course, moments of social formation and constitution of Turkish Republic, the genocide, etc. So we are constantly referring to the political context, but ultimately there is also something about language and the sort of translation and the language as difference, right? So, and negotiating that difference. And in a way, what I read throughout this is that other thread is actually perhaps, even though very important, is overshadowed by the more obvious political dimension. And maybe the anti-crisis gesture that you're suggesting is the necessity to think about language. But thinking about language itself is also very political. And in the sense of right now, if anything, you know, the speaking and in the mother tongue language of Kurdish is itself the most important political frontier in these territories. So just focusing on language itself could be also a thread of this entire sort of exercise. And even Aras's intervention in terms of resisting the language, right? Resisting the semiotics and looking at the image itself, which is captivating, a kind of maybe a more affective, is also a comment on the language as well, right? Even though he also referred to the Pontus, but that's not the important part, in my opinion, in that thread. The important part was his sort of thinking in a non-semiotic way about the photograph, which is also a discussion about language, which is also in Mina and Sezgin's, there's also DreamWorks, right? That's also another form of language, right? So the thread, of course, the publishing house and so on and so forth. So maybe it's possible to think about through that axis as well.
Not to leave it in the air, is this dialogue that you are talking about, which you aimed for, right? Is that taking place? You said that you aimed for a dialogue between the artists and the wider community of refugees. That's what you said, didn't it? Is that what you said? Yeah. So my question is, huh?
To me, it's been going on since we started, and we
So we would like to know, as the audience.
Actually, there is something that I need to correct here. We didn't actually. We were focusing more on the artists. Our aim was to get to know the. Maybe get to know the Syrian artists who are here for a while, or maybe who are going to sort of live here for a while. Maybe that's one thing that was our focus, but not to actually kind of do something like a participatory piece where we do work with the refugees. So it's important that we don't sort of mix those two things together.
Since you asked about if this dialogue is happening or do you have observations, yes, actually, since we started the research in Istanbul, we have some experience and observations, but I don't think it is really the right place to tell about these stories. But maybe we can tell more. But throughout these observations, for example, there was the concert that we met at Babylon, right? There was like amazing Syrian clarinet player, like who was playing in Istanbul, like who wouldn't do it maybe because he lives in New York, but he was brought up by Hamish, the Syrian art culture, art house in Istanbul. So I don't think it is really, you can really divide the story, like the refugees and the politics and art in exile. I think there's like a great transition, which we call like art and culture production at different levels. I mean, this is more in the contemporary art context. The other one was, popular music in Babylon, and the other one's, Pınar cooking dinner with these people that. So I think the dialogue is happening at different levels. So this is just a different level from what you wanted to see.
I just wanted to add also that I think there's been a little bit in the Q&A of a fetishization of the particular issue of Syrian refugees within Istanbul, and I think that the project's attempt was to think more broadly about structural, the structures that are in place that are creating things like exile, refugee, immigrant, etc., and the experiences of that. I mean, that's at least why I agreed to participate in the project, was that I didn't understand that the focus was necessarily on the Syrian refugees, but that the crisis of kind of immigration, exile, displacement, etc., that had taken place was an inspiration for thinking more broadly. Yeah.
Can I intervene? Okay, I just want to say something about what Asu's comments. Of course, we may need to differentiate between terms. That may be a concern, but I don't agree with the idea of the exilic being a comfortable position. First of all, because the exilic and what has been written on that, like by Hannah Arendt, or later by Richard Sennett, by Edward Said, tells us that there is a very particular and important, significant crisis. And that crisis, according to Arendt, is with the forced exile of the Jews from the Nazi Germany. That exilic position brings to the fore the crisis of politics itself. It is at the core of politics, says Hannah Arendt. So we may draw a parallel between this exilic situation and the refugee situation now, putting into crisis, as Sezgin was saying, all the things that we know or we assume that we conform to in this world, including the language, and it opens up the possibilities of thinking otherwise. So I think there can be parallels in this conversation in language and also in terms of images. I think made lots of, gave me lots of new needs to think about these issues in different terms. So thank you for that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I was provoked to think a little bit about this question of language and how things are represented precisely from your talk, actually. And I wanted to hear what you had to say about the grassroots that you mentioned in connection with your horticultural speculations, and it occurred to me, I mean, I don't know whether this is kind of hopelessly provocative, but seems to me we can try to represent the refugees as and I think it is possible to distinguish refugees from immigrants, from exiles. I mean, these are different positions and different fates and different legal kind of statuses. I mean, we can get confused about them, but it doesn't mean we don't know what we're talking about all the time, does it? I mean, it occurred to me that we could say that the refugees in English-speaking territories, or territories that officially respond to English, shall we say, at a political level, where people are not exilic in the sense that was just raised, I think, but participants. The refugees are not represented as, I mean, they're represented as labour power sometimes, yes. I mean, artists or doctors and actually artists aren't mentioned in that list, are they? I mean, doctors or other kind of, people who are going to contribute to the culture, the civilization, and in this sense, maybe, is this the kind of, I don't know if this is the contradiction you were talking about as the workerist thing, right? But I worry about that a bit, because one of the things that seems to me that happened across Europe, the journalists kept saying it's grassroots, but that doesn't really make sense anymore, does it? I mean, this is through social media, this is Zinedine Zidane, this is other figures across Europe saying, I mean, who's the guy living in France who said they can, maybe that was Zidane, I can't remember now, but they can come and live with me for a couple of years, yes? I mean, this sort of sense that the refugee represents need, I mean, base need, the sense that they can't go forward. I mean, I take it that, I don't know whether Apricots from Damascus is the failure of this, inability to bring something with you, maybe, as a refugee, right? I mean, I'm an immigrant. I'm a Brit who works in Istanbul, and I know I'm not a refugee, so I'm not confused about that, I think. But maybe grassroots is one of those kind of nativist problems in some ways, right? I mean, how do you represent the circulation of opinion? How do you represent, and the fanzine seems to me to be at least trying to engage with that, right? I mean, grass spreads, doesn't it? It's said to be rhizomatic, I believe, but it's also represented as rooted here. So maybe you'd like to comment on that political culture that the refugee challenges. I don't know.
Well, okay, so I'm not really sure that I followed everything that you said, or that I'm going to address it. But I'm going to address, I guess, I mean, it was interesting to think about grassroots and the way that you presented it, which, given that I had done a zine which has to do with language and botany, I hadn't really thought through. So thank you very much. But my reference, I guess, to grassroots was kind of flippant. And also, I guess my sense was that it grows close to the ground and kind of, again, it spreads. I guess it is rooted in a sense. It doesn't necessarily rooted in another sense, which is that it comes out of its own context, or which is potentially a problem of nativity, but not necessarily, because it doesn't have the same sense of like limitations, I think, as when we talk about nativity. I mean, there's not the same exclusion in terms of who can participate within a grassroots movement. And I had just imagined, like, because of the nature of zines themselves, and the idea of do-it-yourself, it's kind of a form of mobilization and creating a community or something. Clearly, I don't think that much will change, unfortunately, through people cross-pollinating plants. But I just thought that it might be kind of a way to think about identity a little bit differently and participate, I don't know, through participation, I guess. I don't know if that addressed your question at all.
Can I add something about that laborism and workerism that you comment a bit? Actually, I would like to remind you that one of the maybe interesting case, a collective involving also artists and theoreticians, Kanak Atak, their first from Germany. Their first project was about a wild strike initiated by Turks in Germany in 70s. It is very interesting project because it is politicizing immigrants through work, through labor. And I claim that still it is possible to politicize the immigration, this struggle through a labor, through a work. In which way? In the manifesto of Kanakatak, there is very interesting, I would say, a joke. They say whenever is the weather good in the economy in Germany, Germans put a sticker in their cars saying, "Foreigners, please don't leave us alone with Germans." But actually, it was an artwork made by Danish collective called Superflex, a poster around Copenhagen saying, "Foreigners, please don't leave us alone with dance." This is the artist. This is the artist collective trying to politicize the existence of immigrants through the notion of identity, through whatever that identity is. But what happened when the immigrants come through with the idea of labor, with the class issues? Then they are not participating as would be with a ruling nation, let's say Danes or Germans or here Turks, which in the backup there is always some nationalistic idea that even ties let a class struggle to let reproduction. You see, when the Turks are making the claim about class struggle, of course they do. Through the identity, it somehow connects in the end with a nation, with a Turkey. But when immigrants claim the class struggle, it is never connecting with the place where they are. It is actually radically cutting through the existing things about the nation. So I think today still we can claim for this, what you said, the laborist or workerist politicization of the immigrants.
I mean, thank you for responding. I wanted to say more about that, but isn't it more about, the status of the refugee who has to work for their living?
There is
Thank you very much for saying what you just said about that. I mean, the status of the refugee who, if they're not, this exceptional person who brings great things to the civilization and so on and so forth, yes, will be making a contribution. It's more than a contradiction. I mean, this is, as it were, unrecognized work, isn't it? I mean, it's something that's to be rejected somehow. I mean, it's somebody who will have to work for their living at some point. They're kind of, this is how they're also represented. Yes. So it falls out. It seems to me it falls outside what you would, the state of being a worker in that sense. I mean, precariat is the term that comes to mind, I suppose. I mean, not that it's not to do with work and labour, but.
So I think it's just the time, because, Stephen. So you had to say something. So I think we need to really listen to Stephen because he's the initiator of the whole thing.
So one of the things I said earlier when I was greeting everyone here, I said if there are any problems, and we cause them a lot, write to us. Now I have to defend Atif and Dilek a little bit because our process is one where we invite people to submit a proposal. We don't question the level of eruditeness they have. We don't question anything. They don't claim they are curators. They put together a very valiant effort which has resulted in a really excellent discussion here, and their show is a catalyst. It's not a problem. the criticisms that people are mentioning that are personalized are very valid criticisms, but it's not that they, as curators, intended to address all of these situations. Incidentally, you are addressing them, and that is really important, but don't look at their show as having been wrong-headed or going in the wrong direction. It is what it is, and it's presented this, it's going around the world, people are considering it. So give them a break, and if you want to be angry, write to us.
Give us a break upstairs with the drinks that Salt is graciously providing with us. Thank you.